Well, hey everyone, Andy Serwich here with Altaro Software, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of a follow-up video to a video that we released back in very early January that centered around the SolarWinds hack and the fallout from that. And just like last time, I've got Fabio Viggiani on the line with us. How's it going, Fabio?
Hey, Andy. It's all good. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, this is a great, we had a great conversation about this last time. There's just, anytime there's a security issue like this or a breach of this scale, right, there's always fallout, right? And we talked about some of the fallout in our last video, but it's been a couple of months now, and what I wanted to do for our viewers is kind of circle back, see if there's been any new information that's come out in the months since the breach initially happened, and I don't know, maybe see if their playbook changes at all based on the new information. So I guess what I want to start with for just kind of a general first question is, if I look at the state of IT and just the state of IT security in the last couple of months, I don't know if it's just my perception. It just kind of feels like there's been a lot going on in the security industry lately. And, have we really seen a big uptick in security issues over the last couple of months, or does it just feel that way to me?
Well, there has definitely been a couple of interesting events, quite large events. I mean, an obvious one is the Exchange hack. It was the beginning of March, right? The proxy logon vulnerability. There was the believed to be Chinese nation state, launching these attacks, and turns out there were actually multiple APT groups. But that was pretty huge one, right? We're talking about 60,000 Exchange servers hacked around the world. And I mean, that in itself was a pretty big event, and also the fact that the actors behind it were pretty bold. I mean, there's been, after Microsoft has released the information about the vulnerability, there has been massive exploits. Basically, before everyone could patch, they went on and basically installed backdoors everywhere they could. That was pretty massive and, pretty bold too. Then we have this cybercrime side of things as well, right? Not just APTs, possibly nation state, but also especially the ransomware gangs are also getting very bold. I mean, they even take interviews with journalists, right? You probably read a couple. Now it's actually not uncommon anymore to see them like actually going, talk to a journalist and then writing an article. And say, yeah, this is how we operate. This is, our large ransomware operation works this way. They even say that they go after victims that have cyber insurance because they are more likely to pay for ransom. They even hack the insurance companies first so they can get all their clients, and where they're done with them, they get the insurance company itself. So, you read about this stuff, and obviously it gives that perception, right? Now, if you look at the facts, I think in terms of numbers, things have been going steadily up for a while now, and I don't think that has really spiked since January specifically. But of course, you have this couple of big events that makes it feel that way. And people have more awareness as well, right? When you have such a large story like SolarWinds, people will start to be a bit more aware, read more in the news about this stuff. Newspapers also like to write more about this, so it's all it all goes together. It gives you that perception. But being in the field for a few years, I don't see necessarily a huge increase in the last couple of months necessarily.
Gotcha. When I was putting the questions for this interview together, I was just asking myself the same question, like, am I crazy, or does it just feels like it doesn't necessarily mean that there are more. It just kind of feels like it. And like you said, I think the boldness factor has increased definitely from the sounds of things. And I going after the insurance company, that like you said, the boldness of it, right, is just kind of at a new level that maybe we haven't seen, at least recently in the recent past.
Yeah, they even add like new services to their like ransomware as a service operations. So now they offer their affiliates for free. They can make a phone call to the victim after the ransomware encryption, like for additional pressure. They actually call them up and say, "Hey, you need to pay." which is, it's not a huge thing from a technical perspective, right? It's just a phone call. But if you think about it, it brings, one thing is reading a ransom note, in Notepad on your computer that is encrypted. One thing is getting a phone call from someone that actually talks to you. At the personal level, it's different.
Right.
So there's that, and then they add more things on top of their already very successful operations, like after ransomware, after the phone call, you can also purchase, as an affiliate to the ransomware group, for your victims, you can also purchase a follow-up DDoS attack to further put pressure on your victim. So even if they don't pay ransom because they have backups, you're still going to run a DDoS attack against them until they pay.
So they're going to work really hard to get that ransom one way or the other. Well, interesting. Well, in terms of this video, I kind of wanted to circle back and focus a little bit more now on the SolarWinds issue specifically, which, as everyone saw in the news, was a big deal towards the end of calendar year 2020. Well, I shouldn't say just then. It's still a big issue today. But, from a technical and a vulnerability perspective, can you kind of give us a little bit of, of information on what's the new info that's come out regarding the SolarWinds breach since we last talked at the end of December? Is there any new major developments that are worth talking about?
Well, I think there are a couple of interesting findings from a forensics perspective and investigation perspective. One thing in particular is how they actually breached SolarWinds in the first place. Because that was still like speculation at the time. People were saying maybe they, because they delivered this malicious update, right? So they could have either maybe just breached the server where they host the updates, but then they would also have access to a legitimate sign-in certificate because the update was signed. So that could be like one approach, right? They could have followed, or they could have breached the development environment and actually introduced the backdoor inside the code before then it was pushed to the build side of things. Turns out that they made it even more sneaky than that, because what they did is we don't know exactly how they breached it, but they managed to breach the build server itself. There's also speculation on how, but they haven't actually revealed the exact results of the investigation. There were indications of being accessed as early as September 2019. Then their Office 365 was confirmed compromised in December 2019, maybe even earlier. And then later on, they actually managed to get on the build server. On the build server, they had this really sophisticated piece of malware that it would monitor for processes running on the build server. It would wait for the certain process that compiles, the source code into the binary.
Right.
And just at that time, they would swap the source file. They would swap the original source file of the Orion software with their own code, which was based on that. They just introduced the other part. So there were also pretty advanced safeguards in terms of ensuring that they wouldn't just override a different file, or they wouldn't override a different version of the file because maybe it would break. And if there was anything that looked a bit weird, they would just abort. So it was very careful. But that also means that they didn't introduce it during the development. So if you look at the development platforms, the code repositories were clean. They actually put it on the fly in memory on the build server as it was being built. So that was pretty interesting from a technical perspective.
So developers over there at SolarWinds, they're going about their business, and it's happening during the build process, but very, very quietly during the build process. So your rank and file developer who's running the build process there has no idea, essentially.
No, and the process is largely automated, I guess, these days, right? So I mean, right. You run your pipelines, and you push your code, and you go through the process, and then at some point it's going to be compiled and then signed and all of that. It's just that something got swapped on the fly in the way.
Yep.
So that was pretty interesting. Then there are also some indications that perhaps SolarWinds was not the only way to get into their targets. Some of the targets seem to have been affected by similar like post-exploitation techniques and infrastructure, but they didn't have SolarWinds at all. And that's also, it's not really clear. I mean, they don't normally disclose all of that because normally you can't talk about the cases you work on specifically,
right,
in terms of which company it is. But I think we mentioned this last time as well, that they did follow a multi-layer approach, right? So they went on to compromise certain targets through SolarWinds, and then from there they use the access and maybe software that they provide to others to breach the second layer targets as well, right? When saying that they tried to do with CrowdStrike, where they breached their Office license providers, and they used that to get into CrowdStrike. It was unsuccessful because they didn't use Office 365, but that was kind of the approach. So I wouldn't be surprised that you see maybe 2 or 3, even 4 layers of this going, under several months that the operation was going. Then in terms of attribution, I think it's pretty clear by now that it's quite certain that it was Russian behind it. I mean, the U.S. has issued sanctions just a few days ago, is it right? That they actually sanctioned Russia for this operation, and specifically mentioned not just Russia but SVR, which is the Russia's foreign intelligence service.
Right. Yeah, that was a big deal in the news the last, not that long ago. Yeah,
a couple of weeks, I think.
Yeah,
and that's also, I mean, that's interesting from a whole different perspective, right? Because, countries spying on each other, like they've been doing this since forever. So it's kind of interesting to see, like, why is this different? And it can be debatable. I mean, of course, the scale is a lot different, perhaps, but where is the line really? It becomes a whole different discussion, maybe not for the topic here, but I think it's an interesting point in itself, the fact that this happened, and what does it mean also for the future? Like, how are these things going to be treated later? Then we have, initially we had information that most of the targets were US based. There is also later on been information that at least six EU or European agencies were also targeted as part of this. So it's not just it was not just US based targets. Then I mean, I think we could go on and also try and connect this to other types of investigations. We do have some ongoing research in relation to possible connections between SolarWinds and other groups, and potentially cybercrime as well. But that I'm not going to speculate so much now, because it's ongoing research, and it's usually long-term research. So for the SolarWinds case specifically, I think those are the main findings since last time we talked.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good segue into my third question, is that, when we talk about all of the new information that's come out since the initial breach, is there any indication that we talked about that perceived uptick in security issues, right? Where it feels like there's more happening in the months since the initial breach months ago. Is there any indication that perceived uptick in security vulnerabilities is tied to the SolarWinds breach in any way? Have they taken some of the bits and pieces and some of the payloads that they've gotten from that breach and used it to conduct other operations that we're aware of, at least?
Not that we're aware of. I mean, usually these things are, if they are connected, they are connected in a much longer term. When you talk about this type of operation, in terms of perception, I think, like I said, it's mostly, the fact that people have been more aware. I think that also triggered more assessments, which of course means there are more findings, and then it's kind of a loop.
Right.
I wouldn't directly tie these happenings with SolarWinds itself. Even though we know it's a very complex operation, there has been different parties involved, it is very much possible that some of the targets that were compromised as part of that campaign are still somehow related to active compromises. Maybe they were used to jump somewhere else, and that part has not been found, and they're still there. But I mean, they have really large-scale operations all the time. The SolarWinds were just one part.
Right.
So these, it's hard to connect these things.
Right.
In terms of vulnerabilities, like I said, like finding more vulnerabilities is it's something you do when you assess more, right? as a consumer or as a customer. But from the threat actor perspective, it's part of their playbook. So it's not necessarily connected.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. So, kind of what I want to wrap up with for this particular video is I've been talking to a lot of MSPs who, they're looking at all the recent security breaches. I've had a couple ask me the question that I just asked you: is there any correlation or indications that they're tied together? I guess based on the new information that we have, does it change the playbook for the MSP at all in terms of security? If I'm a service provider, do I change my security strategy based on any of this new information? I think from what I'm hearing, I guess I would answer that as no, based on what we've been talking about in this interview. But from your perspective, outside of the usual stuff that a service provider should be doing for themselves and their customers, is there anything that you would change based on what's happened between the initial breach and now?
No, not really. I mean, I agree with you. It's if anything changes, it's the pace at which it should be done, because things go faster. But that is, in my opinion, nothing to do with SolarWinds. That's just about how things are evolving from an attack perspective. I mean, you could connect it to SolarWinds in the sense that the cyber criminals get inspired by these things. So they do try, to find similar effective techniques or campaigns to deliver other types of malware for other reasons. It's not necessarily that easy. The thing is, what they do now works very well for them, obviously.
Right.
Right. So there's not so much reason to change. But you do see this, this occasional changes in patterns. To give an example, instead of going, I go back to ransomware a lot because we see so much of that. It's possible not to see. That's also, by the way, part of the awareness and the feeling that these things are more. It's hard to miss the fact that companies get encrypted fully. They are actually down. I mean, some don't even come back. So it's hard.
Exactly.
It's hard to miss.
Right.
But yeah. So an example there would be like, instead of going from encrypting every server, you go and attack the hypervisors directly. You shut down all the machines, and then you just encrypt the disk in one place. It's a lot more efficient. We're actually kind of waiting for this to happen. It would be a next logical step, and it's happening now.
I'm surprised we haven't seen that yet. I'm a virtualization guy, have been for a long time, and yeah, I'm surprised we haven't run into that yet. Fingers crossed. Well, yeah, a big one, right? Is kind of is what I was thinking of. But yeah, definitely.
Right. Yeah.
That's one that you don't ever want to see.
No, exactly. But yeah, no. Otherwise, in terms of playbook, I don't think anything really changes. It's the things we always talk about, which is, it's never bad to repeat many times every day.
Right.
But I mean, we had some very horrible case of MSPs actually getting infected with ransomware because they went and managed one of their infected customers, just because they didn't have proper separation, and which they were connecting not in the most not in the proper way, so to speak.
Right.
Like sharing drives and so on. So having that in mind as well, it's a very hostile environment we're in. Don't trust your customers or your customers' environments, to be precise.
Right.
because they shouldn't trust their own either, and you shouldn't trust your own either. We talk about assume breach, right?
Yep.
So that's something to never forget. It's easy, you know, when you get on your routines to start taking things for granted. Then I always talk about detection capabilities, because we see like so many times. I mean, like basically all the incidents we worked in, none of the victims have proper detection capabilities. And if you walk it back and say, okay, if we actually had an EDR in place and a SOC looking at it 24/7, would we have seen this, and at what point, and how long, you know, would we have enough time to see it and stop it? And the answer is almost always yes.
Right.
No matter really how long it takes to breach them. Sometimes it's very fast. Sometimes it can take months in between the breach and the next thing happening, because maybe you get breached by a large campaign, and then this access is taken and is sold as part of a package sold on dark web. Someone needs to buy it. Someone is going to use it later on for a different type of attack. So there can be some time in between, or it can go very fast. You never know. But it doesn't really matter unless you can see it. So I always go back to talking about monitoring, especially from an endpoint perspective. So I can't stress it enough that having monitoring on the endpoints, and by endpoints I mean clients and servers, all the systems, it's extremely important. We see like a direct connection between the lack of it and the success of the attacks.
Yeah, that's good advice. I mean, and not only just having monitoring, but actually have somebody actually looking at those logs and actually using the tools, right?
Exactly.
I think I've seen that so many times where, we, they buy a SIM solution, they have all this monitoring put in place, and nobody's watching it, right?
Yeah, it has happened several times. You know, we get into an incident response case, and we start looking at the logs and all of that, and say that, okay, wait, but you had this tool, and you actually had alerts 2 weeks ago. Just, no one looked at it, or whoever looked at it didn't understand it.
Right.
So that's the other part, right?
Yep, definitely. Well, that's great advice. I appreciate you coming out and hanging out with us today, Fabio, and kind of sharing your insights as to what you've seen in the months since the initial breach happened. And yeah, I'm glad to hear that the general strategy doesn't change. And as always, great advice on the things that MSPs, and companies should be doing to kind of shore up their security and their day-to-day work. So, well, with that, Fabio, I want to say thanks again for coming out and sharing your insight. Always good to have you, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Definitely. And everyone watching, appreciate you stopping by and watching this video, and we'll see you again for a future Altaro video sometime in the future. Have a good one. Thank you.